Hey guys, welcome back to Bear Mountain Builds. I'm Zach, and today we are building the strongest engineered cantilevered lumber rack you'll ever see. Now let's get started. So when the shop was first built, I was working all over the place and I kept having to pick up my lumber and move it around because that's where I needed to work. So I built this little lumber cart and it worked really well. I was able to move it around while I worked on the walls, did insulation and everything. But now that I'm starting to get settled in here and really figure out where I'm going to be working and all my workspaces are the same, it's time to reclaim this square footage and get this lumber up on the wall. Now let's get started.
I'm using 2x6s for this entire build, and like most of my builds, I'm starting off with planing the top and bottom sides by 1/8 of an inch. You really don't have to plane your wood, it's going to work great regardless, but I like to just because it results in a really clean final product. With the boards planed, I cleaned up the edges on the table saw. With the boards all cleaned up, I moved over to the miter saw to start cutting out all my pieces. I have all the dimensions for this entire build in my plans, which you can find linked down below in the description, so check them out if you're interested. You might notice that some of these boards aren't perfectly straight, but that won't be a big deal once we start putting everything together. Finally, I'm cutting an angle on the arms to match the supports.
All right, so we got all of our pieces cut out. Now let's run through it real quick. First off, we have our cantilever arms that are actually going to be holding the lumber, and we got our gussets that are going to reinforce these cantilever arms so that way they don't have quite as much torque on them. Then we got our spacers, and that just evenly spaces everything out, so that way everything's going to be level once we get all of the racks on the wall. And then finally, we have our 9-foot boards that are going to sandwich both sides of these, and it's going to really just make everything rock solid. Now, we're going to be gluing and screwing this whole thing together, but one thing to note is we really want to have good contact between all of these small pieces. That way we have load transfer through our wood all the way into the floor, and it's going to keep everything really secure. Now, let's get building.
I'm loading each piece up with glue, clamping it into place against the longboard, then securing it with 2.5-inch number 10 structural screws. Like I said before, you really need to make sure you're getting good, firm contact between all these smaller pieces so that we're getting good load transfer. I'm not screwing the arms and braces together, so I'm making sure to leave the clamp on until the glue is dried. Throughout this process, I standardized the positions of the screws for each piece so that when I attach the final longboard, I know roughly where all the screws are and won't hit them. When attaching the final board, I don't show all of it, but I run screws along the middle of the board over the entire length.
All right, we got all of our racks put together. They're looking really good, and honestly, they're turning out more robust than I planned on. So if you are gonna be building this in your garage, you can probably just use 2x4s and you'll have the desired weight capacity that you're ever gonna need. But this is a big shop, so 2x6s are gonna fit right in. Now, as you can tell, we had a little tolerance stack up through the middle pieces, which was expected. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all these over to our miter saw, square up the top end and the bottom end, and then we're gonna run some bolts through the back side of the arms, and that's just gonna give it a little bit more leverage to resist the torque. However, at this point, it's probably not needed, but it's gonna look cool. Now, let's keep going.
When I square off the bottoms, I'm making sure that the cut is the same distance from the top of the lowest arm on each rack, so that when we mount these on the wall, the arms will be level to each other across the 4 racks. With the ends squared off, I'm drilling 3/8 inch holes centered on the supports and the arms. Now, I drill a lot of holes and can struggle with drilling perpendicular to the wood, so if you're like me, I highly recommend getting the Kreg portable drill guide. It's really inexpensive and it makes the process super easy. So if you're interested, I have it linked down below in the description, so check it out. With the holes drilled, I'm installing the 3/8 inch bolts. I'm mounting these racks to the wall using several heavy-duty L brackets. I want to mount the upper 4 to the rack using lag screws, however, the holes aren't quite big enough, so I drilled them out with a step bit. Here's a quick tip for picking up sharp metal shavings. If you just put a magnet in a bag and then pick up all the shavings and hold it over the trash, you can just pull the magnet out and it all falls in.
All right, it's time to get our rack up on the wall, so here's what we're gonna be doing. I'm gonna be mounting all 4 of my racks in between these 2 outlets. Now, I'm in a pole barn, which means I have these horizontal 2x6 stringers running 2 feet on center from each other inside my wall, and that's what I'm gonna be mounting my rack to using these metal L brackets. Now, a couple things to note. One, we need to make sure that these racks are touching the floor when we mount them. That way we get good load transfer through the wood and into the ground. Then also, because of the cantilevered arm, these racks are going to want to tear themselves off the wall due to the laws of physics. However, we can counter that by putting as much of our mounting force as high as we can, because that will give us our maximum leverage. Now, let's get these on the wall.
I'm starting off with mounting a single L bracket to the wall using 4 3 1/8 inch number 10 structural screws. Then I put the rack into place flush against the bracket and make sure it's vertical before mounting it with 2 2.5 by 3/8 inch lag screws. Then, making sure the rack was flush against the wall, I moved to the other side and mounted another bracket. From there, I mounted the 3 other L bracket sets every 2 feet, where the top 2 mount into the rack with lag screws, while the lower 2 just use the same structural screws. Then, making sure the rack was flush against the wall, I moved to the other side and mounted another bracket. I'm spacing the racks about 28 inches apart, which will allow me to load in any size board I want.
So now that I've got a couple of these racks up on the wall, I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk about the design and ask you guys to please subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on all my future projects. Now, this design is called a cantilever arm, which means it is supported on one side but not the other. Now, a great part of this design is it's really easy to load lumber in and off the rack. However, the downside of this design is it's only supported on one side and not the other, which means it's going to want to droop. But as engineers, we can fix that. So first things first, we have a brace down here, and that's going to move our point of rotation for our arm from all the way back here by the post to the tip of this brace. Now second, we have spacers on top and bottom that are sandwiched on this arm. That way it resists any sort of rotation, both up and down. Then we have bolts. We have one bolt over here, but only one bolt will allow it to rotate around there. But when you have 2 bolts, it will actually pin this whole arm in place. And then finally, we have a ton of glue and screws in our post that are just holding everything really tight, and it allows for good load transfer through all of our wood and into the floor. Now, this design is super easy to scale up and down. You can even do it with 2x4s. There is so much strength in these racks that honestly, this wall is going to fail before this does. Now, let's get our last rack up.
With that, this lumber rack is done. I'm a little over 200 pounds, and even when I'm bouncing on those arms, they wiggle a little bit, but they do not droop.
All right, the cantilevered lumber rack is done. It has turned out so well. These things look good, but man, are they strong. I can just stand on one of these rungs, doesn't even bend. Now, this design with 2x6s is perfect for my shop, but I realize it's probably a little big for just the garage shop. So I have plans linked down in the description that are going to include both the 2x6 design as well as the 2x4 design. So check them out if you're interested. Now, as always, hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful at all, please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton and I really do appreciate it. And finally, if you just leave a comment, let me know what you think of the build or if you have any questions. I read all of your guys' comments. They are fantastic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.